Please take out your Workbook 2, 2.2, Unit 4, and turn to page 1. Vocabulary 1. Familiar, unfamiliar. Change, changed. Spill, spilled. Caterpillar. Breakfast. Happen, happened. Terrify, terrified. Travel, traveled. Strange. Wonders. Splash, splashed. Crash, crashed. Encounter, encountered. Wander, wandered. Clearing. Outgrow, outgrew. Once in a while. Wherever. Describe, described. Excitement. Tickle, tickled. Perfect. Pond. Theme words. Otter. Great Lakes. Downpour. Prairie. Heron. Needless to say. Didn't mind. Handle things. Please take out your Reading Street Reading Book 2.2 and turn to page 28. A Froggy Fable by John Lechner. Once there was a frog who lived under a rock by himself. Every day he did the same thing. He swam into the pond to eat breakfast. He jumped onto a log to enjoy the sun. Then he swam back to his hole under the big rock. It was a simple life, but he liked it because it was always the same. Then, one day, things started to change. A family of otters moved into the pond and started splashing around. "Hey," said the frog, "I don't like those otters splashing in my pond." A flock of blue jays moved into the trees overhead, and they squawked all the time. "Hey, I don't like those birds making noise," the frog said. And one day, lightning struck the tallest pine tree, which crashed into the water, spilling pine needles everywhere. "Hey, I don't like that tree in my pond," said the frog. But there was nothing he could do about it. The frog crawled into the back of his hole and stayed there. He heard a voice behind him. "Why are you so sad?" It was a small caterpillar. "I'm sad because everything is changing," said the frog. "I'm glad things change," the caterpillar replied. "Someday I hope to change into a butterfly. Trees change, flowers change, even mountains and mighty rivers." The frog just turned back toward the wall. He wanted to cry. The caterpillar left, but the frog stayed in his hole. Then, one morning, something utterly unexpected happened. The rock over the frog's hole was lifted into the air. To the poor frog's bewilderment, a jar came down on top of him, and he was whisked away in the hands of a young boy. Needless to say, nothing like this had ever happened to the frog before. The terrified frog was jostled and bumped on the boy's bike. They traveled a long time when suddenly the bike hit a rock. The jar went flying and the frog fell behind some tall weeds. He sat very still until it was safe. When the frog finally crept out, he found himself in a strange and unfamiliar place. He was lost. The frog wandered until it got dark, then took shelter for the night in a hollow tree. The next morning, he kept on hopping, but just seemed to get more lost. Weeks went by, and the frog encountered many dangers and many wonders. Then, one afternoon, when he had just about given up all hope of finding his home, he heard a noise from far away, a familiar noise. He raced through the forest toward the sound. As he got closer, he heard splashing. Finally, he emerged into a clearing and saw a beautiful pond, his pond. He was so happy to see the blue jays flapping overhead. He was so happy to see the otters splashing in the water. He was even happy to see the fallen tree right where he'd left it. He knew he was home. True, his old rock had been torn away, but he found a perfect spot to dig another hole with an even better view. After that day, the frog didn't mind so much when things changed. He could handle anything. He even tried something new once in a while, and things were never the same again. Now turn to page 46, Ben the Bullfrog by Raquel Martinez. Ben the bullfrog was the biggest frog around. At 1, Ben was as big as a cat. By 3, he was bigger than a cow, and he just kept growing. He outgrew his pond quickly. He always dreamed of finding the perfect home. It had just the right amount of water. It had tall grass by the shore and big trees in the distance. Ben went out to find it. Ben leaped from pond to pond, from river to river, and from lake to lake. All the ponds were just too little for him. No river was wide enough. No lake was deep enough. Ben didn't know where else to go. A large heron flying overhead landed beside him. "What's wrong?" the heron asked. "I'm looking for a home with grass and flowers and lots of water. But wherever I go, I'm always too big." The bird thought it over. "I heard of a place like the one you describe." "Really?" Ben asked with excitement. "Where is it?" "It's far north of here. You pass over the dry lands, through some forests, and through the prairie. You are going to the Great Lakes. From what I hear, you can't miss them." "Great! I'll go now!" Ben waited a minute before jumping. "What's wrong?" the heron asked. Ben looked around. "I've lived around here all my life. It's hard to leave." The heron nodded. "Sometimes we outgrow our first homes. We have to move on. But we can always remember that place in our hearts." The bird reached over and picked a blue flower with its beak. "Here, take this. It will remind you of what you left and what you are looking for." Ben smiled, took the flower, and hopped away. Ben soon reached the dry land. The sand there was hot and hard to jump off. Ben began to leap across. Over time, his skin got dry, and he became very thirsty. The dry land would be a very hard place to live, he thought. Ben saw 2 lizards looking up at the sky. He stopped. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "See those clouds up there?" one lizard said, pointing. "They fly over sometimes, but they never rain." The second lizard nodded. "They say, if you could tickle the clouds, then all the rain would fall out. Ben looked up. I could probably reach them. Really? Ben began to jump up and down. He jumped higher and higher. Soon he was high in the sky. He reached out and tickled a fluffy cloud. A couple of raindrops fell. The clouds laughed hard, and it began to rain. Then the cloud laughed harder, and there was a downpour. The lizards were rolling and playing on the ground. Thank you so much, they said. Why don't you stay here and live with us? Ben had come far, but he still had not found a large lake. He remembered what the heron had said. No, thank you. I know where I have to go. Ben smiled and hopped away. The next day, Ben reached a forest. It had the tallest trees Ben had ever seen. He met a family of worried squirrels. What's wrong? Ben asked. The trees are keeping all their nuts this year, the mama squirrel said. They aren't letting any of them drop. The papa squirrel nodded. We need those nuts for the winter. Ben had an idea. I might be able to help, he said. Ben began to jump up and down. Each time he landed, the earth shook. It shook harder and harder until finally all the trees in the whole forest dropped their nuts. The squirrels ran around with excitement. Thank you so much, Mr. Bullfrog, said the papa squirrel. Why don't you stay here with us? Ben thought about needing a bigger pond. He knew he had to keep searching. No, thank you. I know where I have to go. Ben smiled and hopped away. Ben reached the prairie. It had grasses and flowers, but no trees. It was the longest stretch of open land he had ever seen. Finally, Ben jumped over a sandy hill and saw a huge lake. It was the biggest lake he had ever seen. This must be one of the Great Lakes, he laughed. Ben the bullfrog took one great big leap down the hill. He planted his flower in the sandy hill. That way, he would always remember his home pond. Then, he jumped into the water. The lake wasn't too small, too shallow, or too narrow. It was perfect. He was home.